everybody. Don't mind me. I'm just getting all the Christmas stuff ready. Let's see here. Oh, check it out. Kata Curry's favorite ornament, the Yuletide donut. That's how you know it really is that time of year. Man, I'll put this stuff up probably by the next video. I mean, unless you don't mind, I could just go and put up a Christmas tree right now while talking about, One Piece. I'm sure nobody would be interested in that. It's like Tekking decorates the house. But also, have you guys heard about Whoop Slap? It's like, all right. So anyway, today's a video. This is going to be fun. We're going to be doing a what if. What if Garp, the hero of the Marines, the Fist himself, were to have joined Gol D. Roger, the future king of the pirates? Something that would have sounded ridiculous, but in the most recent chapter, Roger actually asks him that. He says, hey, they're facing down against, Imu-sama, who's also Saturn at the moment. And by the way, they have no frame of reference on what the hell is going on right now. Like, Garp was told, that's one of the Gorosei, but Garp's never met the Gorosei before. He doesn't know about Imu, right? So all from Garp's perspective is that all the Gorosei are evil spider monsters. And then this evil, black viscous substance just bubbles up out of the spider like it's wearing a funny little hat and then infects rocks with evil. That's the only reference there. So Roger's looking at this shit, and he's looking over at Garp, and he's like, Yarg! Garp, I be no expert on things in the Marines, but this thing looks evil as hell. And Garp is like, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it looks evil as hell. And Roger's like, well, if you aren't going to be, with the Marines any longer, journey with me. Join my crew, Garp. We'd love to have ye. And then Garp is like, no, I can't do that. Who would protect the Marines? Who would protect the little guys of the Marines, Roger? Just the new recruits just joining up. My son just joined. I have high hopes for him. Garp has no idea what Dragon's been up to the entire time of God Valley. I don't even know if Garp is even aware that Dragon was present on God Valley, right? He'll probably find out later. Oh, he'll find out in a moment, Remember that one line where Sengoku was yelling at Garp? This is way later in the story of just Garp, it's your damn family again. And so, yeah, you can see where this kind of started, right? So Garp turned down Roger's offer to travel the Grand Line as a pirate and be Santa Claus, because Roger is canonically the Santa Claus of the One Piece world. Yeah, sure, why not? Anyway, so, what would have happened if that would have went differently? I drew up a quick little timeline here. Now, there's a lot of things here that are gonna change, obviously. And also, you gotta think about Garp's character. Would he have ever even, done this? Even if you want to say that Garp would have had enough with the Marines and the government after witnessing what happened with Saturn and Emu and the God Valley incident and the slaves and everything like that, Garp becoming a pirate, that's a little bit of a stretch. If anything, you'd think he would go out and do something else. Maybe he would eventually end up joining the Revolutionaries, or maybe he would do something else altogether, maybe wander a little bit like Kuzan did before he found his purpose. I'm not really sure, but Garp becoming a pirate is a stretch, I know. However, you gotta remember, Garp and Roger, yeah, they do, beat the shit out of each other a lot. They are rivals, but they're also friends. And enemies, they're frenemies, kind of, right? And I mean, Roger is eventually, before he gets executed, is going to ask Garp to take care of his unborn child. I mean, there's a connection there, if nothing else, and Roger says as much. He's like, Garp, you and I have tried to kill each other more times than I can count, but I can tell you're a loyal man. You're a good, respectable person. You won't let my child be punished for the sins of the father, correct? And as we all know, Garp, was true to his word. He went to the South Blue, he met Rouge there, and he took Ace back to the East Blue to be raised by a bunch of mountain bandits. I mean, hey, Garp can't raise a kid, you know what I mean? He's in the Marines, so, Dadan was okay. She was a good mom to Ace and Luffy, and I guess Sabo as well. She essentially raised all three of them, right? So, yeah. We know Garp's a good guy, and Garp and Roger sort of have, the Luffy Smoker sort of dynamic, and Luffy and Smoker have teamed up on more than one occasion before, so it's not, I guess, completely ridiculous. Garp going off and starting his own pirate crew, I obviously don't see that. Garp joining just any pirate crew, probably not. But Garp teaming up with Roger, it's at least the most likely out of all of the scenarios. Still not very likely, but at least something, okay? So let's say he said yes. Let's say he's like, you know what? I will journey with you, Roger. I need to think about some things here, okay? I don't know if the pirate life is right for me, but I need to get out of the Marines and I need to see what else the world has to offer. Maybe something like that. And then Roger is just like, yarg me hearty, that's what I like to hear. So they kill rocks together in the ultimate combo attack. And then they stop for a moment and stare in each other's eyes like, that was a really strong attack, Roger. Yes, it was, Garp. It's like, you too, man. And it's just like, all right. And so then they go off. And Rayleigh and Gabon show up, and they're like, "Oh man, you guys are what the hell just happened? Where's Rox?" And be like, "Oh no, we killed him. We incinerated him with a really strong hockey attack." By the way, Garp's joining the crew now. Gabon and Rayleigh have like the face fault moment of like, "What?" And Garp is like, "Hey." It's like, okay. Seriously though? It's like, yeah. It's like, all right. So what's going to happen with Garp's, like, men that, you know, were on his ship as, like, the Marines? Because they were in communication with the Den Den Mushi, and Garp is just like, okay, mateys, here's the deal. I'm talking like Roger for some reason. He's like, all right, mateys, here's the deal. I'm a pirate now. And so, I don't know, the other members on, like, Bogart answers, and he's like, you what? And just like, here's the thing. A lot of Garp's men look up to him because he is like larger-than-life personality. He has saved them all probably on multiple occasions. You know, Bogart has swore like a fealty oath to him, essentially. I don't think it's impossible that Garp's, you know, Marine, you know, squad would abandon as well, especially on seeing everything here that's happening on God Valley, and just like even Garp just can push them over the edge a little bit and be like, hey, did you not see the giant evil shadow monster? On top of that, disregarding the giant evil shadow monster that gave off like the super most ominous Conqueror's hockey I've ever felt in my life, look at what the government's doing here, and with the hunting contest and the God's Nights and everything. So honestly, I think Bogard would join too. I mean, why not? Bogard would be like, you have my sword, Garp. I've pledged my sword to you years ago. You know, it really does seem that, you know, Garp has taken on a lot of students in the past to train them in the art of being a Marine. Seems like Bogard was the first one. And then after that, we would have had Kuzan a few years later, and then eventually all the way up to Kobe and Helmeppo. You know, so training the next generation of Marines is something that he's always done. So I could see Garp giving them a choice. I don't think Garp would order them to come with him. Obviously, he'd be like, I'm no longer a Marine. I'm no longer your Vice Admiral. If you want to come with me, you have to do so of your own volition, or kind of thing, right? And I think Bogard would say yes, and I think some other men of Garp would go as well. It would be really great if you had a scene, actually, where they all are staring at each other and they all start laughing, and they're like, oh, you're always going to be the Vice Admiral to us, Garp. You know, we don't follow the Marines. We don't follow the world government. We follow you. And Garp, you know, maybe tears up a little bit, and Roger's like, yarg, matey, it seems like you have a loyal crew yourself. And Garp's like, shut up, you guys are awesome. And so, I don't know, they all pile on the Oro Jackson, and I was like, oh, me hearty, we're gonna run out of space, we're gonna have to open up the giant egg. You know, we'll renovate some things, you know, because we're getting a lot more people on the crew all of a sudden, all right? And so they sail off from God Valley with their new companions. Also, Gloriosa joined. Also, Shocky is there too, yeah, because Rayleigh saved Shocky. So Gloriosa and Shocky, I actually completely forgot about that. I knew Gloriosa was there, but I forgot that Shocky was also going to be there for a little while at least. She clearly doesn't stay on the crew for an extremely long time. She eventually goes to Sabaody Archipelago to start up the bar, and then Gloriosa doesn't stick around for very long either. She's not there during Laugh Tale or anything, but yeah, so maybe they'll interact for a moment and figure out what they're going to do next. I'm not really sure exactly how that's going to go down, right? But at any rate, the Oro Jackson is bustling with activity. You know, there's Marines, former Marines there, and pirates, so it's going to be a little awkward for a little bit. You can kind of picture it as a scene where, like, all of Garp's crew is on one end of the Oro Jackson and all of Roger's crew is on the other, and a lot of the members of Roger's crew are looking at him. Like, even Rayleigh and Gabon are probably looking at Roger and just be like, Captain, are you sure this is a good idea? Those are Marines over there, right? They've tried to kill us more times than we can count. Roger's like, don't worry about it. Garp, get your ass over here and join the party. It would be weird. It would be weird at first, but I think eventually there would be some camaraderie there. You know, once again, look at the end of Punk Hazard when you had the G5 Marines and Tashigi and Smoker, and they were all kind of coming together with the Straw Hats and having a meal and everything. It was awkward. It was a little weird at first, but, you know, it all turned out okay. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't end up killing each other in the process, okay? So that would be there. Also, you have a giant pile of treasure. And they're going to start, hey, let's start opening the treasure that the Tenryubito had. You know, you don't have a problem with that, do you, Garp? And Garp's like, nah, I don't care. And they start opening the treasure, and they find baby Shanks. And so Roger is just like, oh, we apparently have a baby on the crew now. Yorg me hearty, what be the child's name? And the kid would be like, Shanks. Like, oh, that was easy. Also, it might have Shanks, like, written in, like, his clothing and be like, oh, his name be Shanks. All right. And so Garp comes over and just like, Roger, you are not equipped to be a father. Ah, whatever, Garp. You don't tell me what to do. I'm going to raise this kid to be the greatest pirate there ever was. He's going to be the chosen one, I tell you. And Garp's like, yeah, right there. That I don't know if that's a good parenting strategy. So that would be funny. You know what I mean? Just Garp and Roger, like, arguing. Or like, oh, okay, no, you do not raise this child to be a pirate. He should be raised to be a good Marine that's going to change the world. No! And so that's when Garp leaves, right there. He was part of the crew for 10 minutes, and that's when he left. There's a couple of moments I could see here where Garp would be, like, just going his separate ways. Like, even if he did agree to just go with Roger briefly, there would have been a moment where he's like, all right, I gotta get out of here. I gotta leave. You know, I could see that. But provided that doesn't happen, they sail off their new crew. All right, now what role would Garp and his Marines have on how would this mesh? You know, how would this even go about it? So I think Garp, military-minded man, is going to step into like the drill sergeant role of Roger's crew. Like, he's going to be like, the next day he's going to be waking up bright and early, and he's going to be looking at all of the men of Roger's crew. And I'm not saying Roger's crew are lazy, but you know, they're pirates, you know, so there might be a situation there where he's like, hey, ship up over there, hey, you stop with that posture, you know, kind of shit like that. And Garp just starts barking orders at the random members of the crew, you know, like, I don't know, they're making breakfast, but they're not doing it up to Marine standards or some shit. And Garp comes in and just like, you expect me to eat this slop? And just like throws it on the ground. And Max Marks, who's the chef of the Roger Pirates, is like, hey, now you don't throw my food to the ground, you know, I don't know. And they just have like disagreements, and it's gonna be like that for a while, right? But I think eventually Garp's gonna be like, there's gonna be some changes around here. First of all, everybody wakes up at the crack of dawn. Actually, everybody wakes up an hour before the crack of dawn, because we're gonna start working out. And his members of Roger's crew are like, oh man, why Roger, why did you let him join? You know, and so hey, I'll tell you what though, after a little while though, after you get into the routine, Garp is going to train the Roger crew. They're going to be even stronger. Every single member of the Roger crew are going to be walking around ripped as holy hell, right? You know, like Ario, the random tourist guy that joined, it seems. No, he's going to be walking around. He's going to be like, yeah. Everyone's going to be built like the T-800, right? And so that's going to be the new dynamic of the Oro Jackson here, okay? And so Garp's going to step into like the instructor or drill sergeant role, let's say, okay? Their battle power is just absurd now, okay? Literally Garp and Roger jumping into every single combat. Like, the Yonko kind of coalesce after this. You know, shortly after this, you eventually would have Whitebeard, Big Mom, Shiki, and Kaido become emperors at different points. You know, Kaido doesn't become an emperor until a little bit later. I could see Big Mom and Whitebeard and Shiki becoming emperors relatively early on. Eventually, Roger is going to fight against Shiki at the Battle of the Edd War. We're not quite up to that yet. That was 27 years ago. But, yeah, I mean, like, they're like, who could possibly stand up against Roger and Garp at this point, other than, like, the top echelons of the world government, like the Gorosei? How would Sengoku and Suru and Kong respond to this? Like, we found out that after God Valley, Garp left the Marines with his entire squad and are now journeying with freaking Roger. And so, Sengoku and Suru have known Garp the longest, so maybe they were like, well, he must have a good reason if he's doing that, right? Like, he's gotta, like, he can't be just, he's obviously not an evil pirate now, so there has to be something else going on here, right? Kong would have no idea how to explain this to the higher ups, like, how do you even begin to explain that, right? But, yeah, they would essentially give Garp a bounty, like, they would have to. They would have to give Garp a bounty, they would have to give Bogart a bounty, they would have to give all of these Marines that defected fairly high bounties. In fact, I could see this kind of a situation where Garp's bounty might even be higher than Roger's at this point. Roger eventually has the highest bounty in the story. It's like 5.5 billion. However, this would have been many years before he became the Pirate King. So I'm sure, what do you think Roger's bounty was during the God Valley incident? Now, you also have to kind of adjust for bounty inflation a little bit here. But even like 1 billion, like a billion berries at this point, that's just Jack's bounty now. But back then it would have been way worth like a lot more. So it could have been something around there. Let's say Rogers is 1 billion and Garp's is 2 billion or something because he's a defecting vice admiral. I mean, oh my God, right? Like, that would be absurd. They would really want to make sure to bring him in to make an example out of that guy, right? The paper of that Morgans is going to spin is not going to talk about Garp in the same way. Garp is not the hero in this timeline. He is a hero to, like, his men, but he is not, like, written about by, like, Morgans as, like, oh, the hero of the Marines and of the God Valley incident, Monkey D. Garp. So that's going to get, like, somebody else. Some other person is probably going to be the focus of that article, and I have no idea who it would be. Garp's reputation is very different now, and he has a bounty on his head, okay? And then meanwhile, Sengoku and Suru are probably going to try to reach out to him to see what the hell is going on, and I think Garp would be, Garp doesn't really talk much about the God Valley incident in the current timeline, but in this timeline, maybe he does, and maybe he explains to Sengoku and Suru the kind of shit that he witnessed on God Valley, like, you guys weren't there, you didn't see what I saw. If you saw what I saw, you wouldn't want to be in the Marines either, right? And so maybe Sengoku and Suru are like, shit, all right, well, maybe there is some other stuff going on here. Maybe they start investigating. Maybe they get in too deep, and maybe they get executed, or they get arrested and thrown in Impel Down, or maybe they end up defecting as well. But now we're going off on a tangent that, let's try to stick to Garp and Roger in this version of events, okay? So eventually, the next big timeline moment is about 30 years ago, okay, so like around 8 years after God Valley. There's actually 2 events in Garp's life. Number 1, he fights against Don Qingjiao, and this is where he gets the title of The Fist. And then he also trains Kuzan to become a Marine with the battleship bags. This happens at around the same time, although in one version of these events, Garp has his mustache and his goatee and everything, his beard, and he doesn't when he's training Kuzan. Now, I could explain this very quickly. Garp, I think, could grow a beard very fast. It took me like 3 or 4 months to achieve this level, which isn't much. But I think Garp, if he just doesn't shave for like an hour, he just... he has to constantly be shaving, because he's Garp, right? So he could just, like, go and train Kuzan, he takes on a new disciple, and then he's like, you know what, I feel like growing a beard. Woof! And then he goes and fights Qingjiao in the same year. It would be very easy to do that. But in this version of events, obviously, he's not there to train Kuzan, so somebody else has to train him. So Kuzan finishes, like, the basic training of the Marines, but he wants to go further. He wants to go plus ultra, as it were, right? And so he goes to Garp. Well, there's no Garp in this version, so he has to either go to Sengoku, or maybe Suru. Maybe Kuzan learns about strategy instead. Maybe he goes to Kong and asks Kong to train him directly. Okay, so Kuzan would still get the training. At this point, I don't even know if he technically joined the Marines when God Valley occurred. So when Kuzan joins, he might have already heard about, like, oh yeah, Garp, Vice Admiral, he was a good man, but then he defected, right? So who knows, though? Maybe Kuzan, like, travels the seas to search for Garp and ask him to, train him even despite not being a Marine anymore. And then so Kuzan ends up joining Roger's crew at a young age, too. I mean, maybe that happens. Maybe Kuzan is just like, no, I want to learn the ways of the fist from Garp and no one else. I don't care if he's a Marine. I don't care if he's a pirate. I don't care if he's anybody else. I want to learn from him. So maybe that's what Kuzan does. That's a possibility. So you add him
him to the midst. I don't know if he would have the Hia no Mi, though, in this version of events. I'm not sure if I don't think he had the power before he joined the Marines. I think he got the ability while he was part of the Marines and eventually became an admiral. So maybe that still happens, or he trains under Kong or Sengoku or somebody, some other really powerful Marine. Maybe Zephyr trains him, I guess. Well, Zephyr does actually train him in the movie. He's like part of that. So maybe we can incorporate him into this what if scenario, whichever. But yeah, then Qin Zhao. I think you could still have the fight with Qin Zhao kind of play out the same way. Roger's crew runs into Don Qin Zhao's crew, and they're at the ice sheet in like the South Pole trying to find the treasure. Garp could still punch his head down, to destroy the dragon arrow or whatever he had going on here, the dragon spear. You could still have all of that, and you could still have his title be the Fist. So he's not the hero anymore, but Garp's wanted posters all around the world say, Garp the Fist, 2.6 billion. And Garp and Roger are like constantly at odds to be like, I'm stronger. No, I'm stronger. Actually, that brings up an interesting question. Was Garp stronger than Roger at God Valley? Was Garp stronger than Rayleigh at God Valley or Gabon, right? Or they were all roughly the same level? That's a question for you, the viewers. What do you think, Roger? Yarg be hurty. I think I be stronger than Garp. Well, of course you would say that. Yes, of course. Okay. So we could, figure out power scaling there. 27 years ago is when the Battle of Edd War occurs. It's when Shiki, who would have been a Yonko at this point, shows up against the Oro Jackson with his massive fleet of ships. Luckily for Roger, a giant storm blew in at the last moment, and that kind of was the thing that saved their ass. But it was sort of implied by Shanks a little later that if that didn't happen, if, sheer providence of nature did not save them, they were kind of fucked. You know what I mean? And so Roger even was like, I'm not sure about this, matey. But now with Garp backing him up, Garp and Roger and a bunch of Marines and some other strong people on board, maybe they were able to face off against Shiki directly, and they might have been able to beat his ass right there. Who knows, right? Okay, we don't know that much about Edd War. We kind of see it in the lead up to Strong World, but that's kind of it. So after this, we kind of just get to Roger's final journey. So if Garp's going to stick around at this point, they go and they fight against Whitebeard's crew. They're not really fighting to kill one another. It's more about just friendly sparring. I don't think at any point Roger would have wanted to chop off Whitebeard's head or anything like that. So I think that kind of would have played out the same way. Odin would have still joined. Odin would have been there. Odin has no idea who Garp is or what his backstory is or anything like that. From Odin's perspective, Garp would have just been an ordinary, guy on Roger's crew with an interesting backstory. And so Odin could read poneglyphs, and so they're going to go and journey around the world one more time. Strength wouldn't have mattered. They needed somebody that could read poneglyphs, and Odin was one of the very few people in the world that could have done that. So that you could have said, oh yeah, with Roger and Garp, they could have speed ran the whole thing. Roger already did it. He already beat the Grand Line. He already beat the main campaign, and now he's just messing around in the post game trying to find all the secrets, okay? And so, Garp is strong, Roger is strong together, but until they met Odin, it wouldn't have mattered, okay? So they meet Odin, and then they start traveling. They find the road poneglyphs. They end up at Laugh-Tale. Maybe the events of that might have gone a little bit faster, maybe, possibly, but I don't really think so. They eventually end up there, and they all witness what the One Piece is, and I'm sure Garp and his crew, Bogard and everybody, would have laughed their asses off just alongside of Roger and his crew and everybody. They're all part of one crew now, right? But then, of course, this is the moment where Roger disbands the pirates. He's just like, well, I'm gonna be dying soon, so I disband the Roger pirates. Go your separate ways. All right. Now this is where things get interesting, because this would have been the moment where eventually Roger would have ended up in Batalia. I never can really pronounce the name of that island. Ends up in the island with Rouge, and Ace is conceived, and eventually Roger turns himself into the Marines. He gets put in Impel Down awaiting execution. Garp meets him in Impel Down, and Roger tells him, hey, I have a son on the way. You have to be the one to take care of him, right? And so Garp is a little bit hesitant at first, but he eventually does carry out Roger's last wishes, okay? So that doesn't happen now. At least not in the same way, because Garp, is no longer a Marine. He's not going to be, visiting Roger while he's in lockup, okay? So at this point, Roger also he hasn't went to the south yet. He disbands the crew first. And there's a reason why Roger didn't ask Rayleigh or Gabon, hey, Rayleigh, you and I are best friends. I'm going to have a son soon. I need you to look after him, right? Because Roger has no idea if he's even going to have a son yet. He has plans, but that's it, right? Okay? So it was after this whole thing had happened with Rouge that he was sure that she was pregnant, and he was sure that he was going to have a child, is when he asks Garp in the story. So the only way for this to make sense now is if he goes to the south, meets Rouge, things happen, and then after the fact, Garp has to go seek out Garp or Rayleigh or Gabon. It might not be Garp in this version of events, and asks them to look after his kid for him, because he knows what the Marines and the government are going to do if they find out that wherever he's been for the last year, okay? So Roger still needs to ask someone. Maybe he planned ahead in the original story and he knew that, like, okay, I'm going to get a chance to at least speak to Garp one more time before I die. I'll ask him to be my baby's godfather, essentially. All right. So, yeah, he's going to have to reach out to somebody. It could still be Garp. And if it is still Garp, he doesn't have connections to the Marines anymore, but he still was born and raised in Goa. Same thing with Dragons, same thing with Luffy. So he could have easily have just maybe brought Ace still to Dadan. Like, that still very well could have happened in this version of events. It's just that Garp is not a Marine. He is either still a pirate after Roger leaves. Maybe Garp at this point. I don't think Garp would stay a pirate. I don't think he would. And by the way, while being a pirate, I doubt Garp would be like, hey, Roger, let's go beat up some civilians now. That's what we do now. No, that's not how Garp is, even if he wasn't a Marine anymore. So I think he would go like, all right, Roger, I'll be a pirate with ye. I'll even talk like a pirate, but I'm not beating up the innocent civilians. We have rules. And so maybe he, implements some new ground rules on the Oro Jackson or whatever the hell like that, and Roger goes along with it. But in either case, after they know about Roger's illness, like they know he's going to die soon, and he disbands the crew, and they found the One Piece and all that shit, I think Garp would just try to lay low after that. I don't think he would go to be a pirate, his own crew or anything like that. Although, who knows, maybe he would have. The Fist Pirates. So he might just try to lay low, or he might go join Dragon's Revolution, because at this point, right around the time that Roger is executed, that's when the freedom fighters really start getting, notorious. They start getting notable in the world. So maybe at this point, Garp is just like, well, I really don't want to be a pirate. I was doing that as like a favor to Roger because we were like friends, and I can't go back to the Marines, obviously. So it's either lay low or I guess join the Revolutionaries with my son. So maybe in this version of events, yeah, Garp goes and joins the Revolutionary Army and hangs out with his son, and then they kind of, try to change the world that way. And maybe they are way more successful because they have Garp with them now. At least in the early years when they didn't really have a lot of manpower. At this point, though, that's a big boost. Also, like I said, Bogard, I guess, would follow Garp wherever he goes, right? So then eventually we get to Luffy's birth, which is interesting because, Dragon meets somebody, Luffy's mom, and maybe it's Tritoma, who knows, and then Luffy's born, and then Dragon's like, I can't take care of a child, I am leading a revolution, because Dragon talks like Batman. And then he takes baby Luffy and hands him off to his dad. He's like, hey, Dad, watch this baby for me. Well, if Garp is a member of the Revolutionary Army in this version of events, who's going to watch Luffy? I still think Luffy would have ended up on Goa because Garp was mentioned by the King Stelly to be from Goa, and Dragon, I think, he did mention he was from Goa as well. So they have connections there. Like, in this version of events, Garp still knows Dadan, still knows Whoop Slap, So maybe they're like, just drop Luffy off at Fuchsia. You know what I mean? Well, I know the mayor. Mayor Whoop Slap will take care of him. And so maybe Whoop Slap just opens up the door one morning with baby Luffy and a note and be like, come on, not again. Just like, first that Ace kid and now this. So Whoop Slap ends up raising Luffy, and Dadan would as well. Maybe Whoop Slap just gives him over to Dadan and just like, I don't want to deal with this. Oh, but Mountain Bandits. Maybe Luffy and Ace are raised by Whoop Slap in this version of reality. I don't know. They would be the strongest characters in the story if they were raised by Whoop Slap. Man. So that could happen, definitely. But yeah, I think Luffy still ends up at Fuchsia. He still ends up meeting Shanks. I honestly don't think Luffy's story changes all that much here, right? If anything, he learns about Roger earlier from Garp, if Garp wants to speak about him, and if anything, Garp might actually push Luffy to not be a Marine in this version of events after seeing what it's like. I don't know. See, we're really fundamentally going against all this stuff with Garp's character, which makes it kind of difficult to discuss, but yeah, here we are. So what about Kobe and Helmeppo? What about Sword? What about all that shit? Well,
okay, let's piece this together here. Okay, so Luffy, let's assume like Luffy's story relatively stays the same. So, you know, he's raised up at you know, Dawn Island through the Gray Terminal. He meets Ace, he meets Sabo, all that kind of shit, right? Maybe Garp even still trains him when he's a little kid, but not like, you know, basically the same thing. Instead of going back to the Marines, he goes back to the Revolutionaries, so he can't stay around very often. But there you go. I don't know. At any rate, eventually Luffy sets out on his journey. And he meets Kobe, and they go to Shellstown, and they fight against Captain Morgan. They free Zoro, and Kobe and Helmeppo stay on the island to be Marines. That part stays the same. So then somebody is going to be sent to court-martial Morgan, and it's not going to be Garp, because he's not a Marine in this version. It's not going to be Bogart, so it's going to be somebody else. It's going to be some other vice admiral that got sent to deal with this. And the whole reason that Kobe and Helmeppo ended up getting trained at Marine HQ was because they showed, like, Kobe showed his dedication, like, I'm not going to give up on my friend. He kind of went right directly against orders, and then Helmeppo kind of spoke back to Captain Morgan. He's like, hey, he was really nervous at the time, but he's just like, Dad, I don't want to be like you, kind of thing, right? And so because of that, like, attitude that they showed, you know, that moxie, as it were, Garp was like, I'll train you two to be good Marines, and he brought them back to Marine HQ. So that might not happen now, right? It may happen, but it's really like Kobe speaks out of turn, and the Vice Admiral might just like knock him out and kick him out of the Marines, or might see the same thing that Garp saw. It depends on who the Vice Admiral is at the time, and recruits him. If it's somebody like Momonga, I think they would be okay. I think, you know, Kobe and Helmeppo would end up getting trained by Momonga. But if it's another Vice Admiral, one of the more like corrupt ones, this might be more of a problem. Okay, but which Vice Admiral would you like to see Kobe and Helmeppo be trained by? As for Sword, technically speaking, we don't know exactly how Sword started. I assume it's strongly implied it has something to do with Garp, but never directly specified, right? It was never shown that, like, Garp was like, I founded Sword, you know, or anything like that, right? So it's strongly implied that it is, you know, related to Garp and maybe Sengoku working together to create this organization, Suru as well. So maybe Sword still exists, all right? And Drake is still part of it, and Groose is still part of it, and everything like that. You know, but without Garp there, that's a little tenuous, okay? But either way, I think Kobe and Helmeppo would still, provided they don't get kicked out from the whole court-martialing incident, I think they would still train, maybe not as strong as they are now, but they would still be training to be Marines, okay? And remember, Kobe would still be inspired by Luffy to get stronger, and, you know, and Helmeppo is kind of inspired by Kobe in turn, so, like, yeah, they might still, you know, manage to achieve that level. Maybe it takes them a little bit longer, but they eventually might learn Haki and the Rokushiki and all that kind of shit too, right? And Sword continues on. So what's up with Garp then in the meantime? Now, the raid on Hachinosu, that's a different story, right? If we're going along the lines that he's part of the Revolutionary Army, I think the Revolutionaries would be way more effective in this timeline. They'd be going to different islands. You know, you'd have, like, Dragon and Garp as, like, the heads of the revolution. Sabo could still be there as the chief of staff, or maybe, like, the number 3. And then you would still have Koala and Hack and the commanders and everything like that. Oh, would the shit with Ginny have happened the same way? Now, that's interesting there with Kuma and everybody. Ooh, that's like a whole other... You know what? I did say when we were talking about this, like, what if Garp would have joined the Revolutionary Army? That would be like a separate what if. I kind of do want to pause here because this video is already, I think, long enough, and think about how Garp joining the Revolutionaries would go. So this is like maybe a part 2, because I have to sit down and then factor in everything involving, like, Kuma, you know, and like how that would have went, and like Sorbet Kingdom and everything. And so, yeah, I think we're going to pause here for that. But that's how it would have gone if Garp would have joined Roger's crew. So let me know if you have a different perspective on this. Like I said, this is a what if that really goes and conflicts with certain characters, like, traits, you know. So, you know, people can change. You know, Garp might see and might, you know, learn about how, you know, Roger is not like one of the worst pirates ever, maybe, you know, but he's not one of the greatest ones either. I don't know. I don't know how it would go. But at any rate, thanks for watching the video, everybody. Techie 101 signing out. Next time, Christmas tree will be up. Have yourself happy holidays. And donuts.